Good afternoon. Intelligence Forums is delighted to have James Newby, the President and Chief Executive of the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering based in Hereford. This Intelligence Forums podcast, I should say, is really a celebration of business, science and innovation and those that enable it. And I'm going to start by asking James, where did you grow up geographically?
I led a pretty nomadic existence when I grew up. So I spent some of my time in Yorkshire, becoming an avid Leeds United fan. And then I spent the second half of my childhood in the southwest of England. And I left home at 17 and then moved around the country with jobs and work. So I don't feel I really come from anywhere. But if I'm pushed, I would say I'm a Yorkshire person.
And in your formative years, did you have any direction or idea about what you would like to end up doing professionally in your life?
Well, I'm not sure I've got to my formative years yet, but I think you mean my kind of adolescence.
Yeah.
And the answer is really no. I'm one of those people who's ended up in the job I have through absolute accident and stumbling. It's quite interesting to note that I'm probably the only head of a UK university who didn't himself go to university. So it's clear I had no predetermined career path to go and work in the university sector. So I left school and went to work in a shop. And that was fine. I was, very happy with that, but it wasn't with any kind of sense of direction. I ended up quite enjoying it, and I ended up kind of advancing through the ranks for the companies that I worked for in the private sector. And then I just moved, on the basis of doing a reasonably commercial job in the university sector. And that was 25 years ago. And I've just stayed and worked in 2 or 3 institutions and ended up where I am now. So when I look back, I could have been a lot more focused, a lot more planned, and probably should have been. But I just haven't. I'm one of those useless planners who sort of enjoys the job and is willing to do it until he's bored. And if he doesn't get bored, then stays and does it for quite a long time. I'm not bored yet, so I'll keep going for a bit longer.
And how did you find your current position in Hereford, or did it find you?
Well, it sort of found me. I was working in a university in Surrey, in the southeast of England, and was approached about this new idea that the founders of a new university were having in Hereford, and would I like to come and help build it? That's not an offer that you get very often. It's not the kind of thing that happens very often. In fact, new universities in the UK are an incredibly rare thing. They almost never happen. If you think about most of the universities around us, they're all old institutions. And even the newer ones really aren't new. They have some precursor institution. They normally emerge from some other institution that is old. So starting a brand new university from scratch with a completely new idea, doing it in a completely different way, in a part of the country I didn't know at all, but a part of the country that had never had a university of its own. So, we call that a higher education cold spot, was just too interesting and exciting to ignore. So I thought I'd take the leap, and I did.
I mean, what would you say the principal values of the college are? And you're in an ideal position to shape them. So what would you say they are?
I'd say the values are really clear. I mean, in 2 words, it's social mobility. But to expand on that a bit more, the whole purpose of the university is that there's a real problem in the UK whereby you're probably familiar with the statistic. Tony Blair used to go on about it all the time, that 50% of young people should go to university. And when that statistic first came out, it was really to acknowledge the fact that the UK needed much more, needed many more graduates to close its horribly chronic productivity gap. It needed a more skilled workforce, and that it needed a workforce more able to cope with the kind of technological revolution that was, was in Tony Blair's day starting out, but is now accelerated with AI and other technological innovations so fast that it's almost hard to keep up with. So there was a need for lots more graduates, and the target was set that it should be 50%. And you may have a view about whether that's the right number of young people to go to university or not. Opinions on that vary. But the problem is it's not 50% evenly spread across the country. So in parts of the country like London and the southeast, it's up to 70% of young people who grow up there go to university. But in parts of the country like Hereford and Herefordshire, and a few others as well, it's as low as 10, 15 or 20%. So there's a massive inequality there. What that means is those populations where where so few of the young people go to university are then blighted by generational economic problems, low wages, low aspiration, far fewer opportunities to get into really good professional, well-paid work. And in the regions where they're concentrated, you get this economic lag that, those regions fall behind the rest of the country. And in a word, that's kind of levelling up. That's the levelling up challenge. The UK's economic progress has not been evenly spread. It's left behind huge swathes of the country. So the value of NMITE is we were designed and placed in a part of the country. We were doing something in a part of the country where it's more difficult to do because of that social impact we felt we could have. Now, one of the reasons that you get so low rates of participation in some of those left behind parts of the country is because it's very difficult and expensive and challenging socially for young people in those areas to up sticks and move to a university. So the solution has to be put the university where they are, and that's what we're trying to do. So we are creating opportunities for young people to have the same level of aspirations as their more affluent counterparts in the more developed parts of the country. We're refusing to accept the notion that if you're born in a certain part of the country, you should only aspire to becoming a tradesman by going to an FE college and learning, up to level 3 or 4. You should not be denied the opportunity to get a good degree and the professional life, that lifetime of economic security and fulfillment that follows. And if you do that, then it's much more likely the children you have will also do that because they won't be the first in that family to go to university. It's much more likely if there are more graduates in an area like we are, that companies with better paid jobs, knowledge-based jobs, technological companies will move in and start to operate because they'll have a workforce that they can use to drive their business. And if you're patient enough to wait for probably a generation, you could see an economic transformation. It takes time and we're at the early stage, but that's our values and that's what we're here to do.
Presumably your catchment area, it goes a bit beyond Hereford. You've got Monmouthshire and other counties around where you can draw from.
Yes, I mean, we kind of focus on Herefordshire and the wider Marches area. So yeah, we cross the border into Wales and cover that wider area as well. And it's important to note that universities don't traditionally work in regional catchments. They're national institutions. In fact, a lot of them are international institutions. So we do take students from across the UK. It's not like schools and colleges with universities where there's regional catchment. They recruit students from wherever they come from. But that's part of the solution as well. We want to provide half our students come from the local area, the other half come from the rest of the UK. But whichever way you look at it, we're either importing bright talent into an area that needs it, or we're developing homegrown bright talent in an area that needs it. So, both things are equally important.
What would you say your biggest challenges are?
Well, I don't know if you've been watching if you've been following the progress of higher education in the UK generally in the news in the last few weeks. The biggest challenge is that higher education is really based around a completely unsustainable model for financing it and for financing student degrees. The main financing model is that a student pays for a degree by borrowing money from the government, student loans, and those degrees those degrees cost £9,000 a year. Now, the problem is they've cost £9,000 a year for about 15 years. That price hasn't gone up. But of course, all of the costs involved in delivering those degrees have gone up with inflation over that time. So that 9,000 that was set in 2012, I think, is now worth about 5 or 6,000 in that, in that year's money terms. So the value of the value to a university of a student in financial terms has been cut in half over the last year, the last 10 years. And there's hardly any other sector of the economy where prices have been fixed for that length of time and it hasn't collapsed. So there are real challenges in the higher education sector at the moment with just making the economic model work. But apart from that, there's a lot of soul searching going on in government and in universities themselves and in schools and in society a little bit about what the point of a university is, what the role of a university is. Are we places that do research? Are we places that teach children how to become graduates in a 3-year residential model? Or are we here to develop the right skills that the economy needs? Are we here to enrich and enlighten a population through education? I mean, you'll have views about the answers to all of those questions, but of course, not having a clear sense of what we're for as a sector, as an industrial sector, I think is a real challenge, because you need to answer those questions to develop the right strategy, to develop the right funding and the right structures and the right governance and the right regulatory regimes. So one of the problems with higher education at the moment is we haven't really answered the question of what we're for.
And how do you see that your opportunities? I've given you the challenging one about, what are the headwinds, but there's plenty of scope for opportunity, I think, which you'll allude to.
There's huge opportunity. I see NMIT now a model as the antidote to all of the complaints people raise about traditional universities. They take too long to get a degree and cost too much. Well, you can do a degree a year quicker at NMIT, and it therefore costs you a quarter to a third less to do it. So it's much cheaper for students. The other thing is that universities drain the taxpayer of too much money. The student loans don't get repaid at the rate they ought to be. Half of them don't get repaid. So, if we have a cheaper degree, that's a smaller loan, that's a smaller burden on the taxpayer. So it's cheaper for the taxpayer as well. People complain that universities give graduates the sort of degree that doesn't help them in the workplace. It doesn't give them the right skills to succeed in the workplace. It doesn't do what employers want. So our degree is absolutely vocationally focused and technical and hands-on. It's delivered in partnership with employers so that those students become very, very used to the rhythms and patterns of a traditional working day because they work so closely with employers. So we're dealing with that one as well. The other problem with universities, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that they tend to be fixed, very large institutions. They're not very agile. So when economic needs change, when the needs for of the skills required for working in a certain sector change, and AI has shown us how quickly the skills requirement in a workforce can change. In 2 or 3 years, it can be transformed. So you need institutions that can chop and change very quickly to meet those sorts of needs. So we're a small, lean, much lower cost way of getting to a really good quality degree that will get you a good job. And those are most of the things people say is a problem with higher education generally. So those are the opportunities.
And what sort of difference are you making to Hereford? Because it must be quite a difference if suddenly a new body springs up and employment is, on the up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're making a real difference. We've got a long way to go because it's still very early days for us. But there are companies in Herefordshire who have set up or moved here because they want to be close to a university so that they can take advantage of the graduates it produces. So those are jobs and inward investment that wouldn't otherwise have happened. There are countless numbers of young people who grew up here who are now in university and will get a degree and can now really realistically think about a life as a professional that they didn't have before. Those opportunities were simply not available before. So we know we're doing that as well. We work very closely with all of our partners in the civic infrastructure of the city and county as well. We're very proud of where we are and we want the county to be proud to have us in it. So, we do a lot of work on knowledge transfer. We do a lot of translation of original research into the kind of applications that the industry needs, and that we focus very much on what local industry needs, because we want to help the economic generation of our local area. We work very closely with our local authority because we both have a shared interest in creating a place where people want to come and live and study and work. People who may not have been born or grew up here. And actually, Hereford's a wonderfully welcoming place for new students who come from other parts of the country. It's not unfriendly at all. So we get a lot of students who come from another part of the country and just do a degree with us and then stay and do a job because they just find the place so pleasant and very just very pleasant to live. So I think we're doing quite a lot, but we've got lots more to do. It's very early days.
And that brings me to almost the last question I'd like to ask you, and that is, fast forward 20 years, what would you like to see?
Oh, I think Enmite will be an institution with probably several thousand students. It'll be, at the moment, it's a city institution. We're focused in the city of Hereford, but we'll be a county or regional institution by then. We'll have outposts in other parts of the country. I think it's entirely conceivable that the model that Enmite is developing could be lifted and shifted, transplanted into other parts of the country with similar economic and demographic characteristics. And there are lots of them. These are the sorts of cities in the country that might have 60, 70, 80,000 people. So not big cities, not big enough to host a full university, where all the bright young talent that grows up in those cities either leaves to go to university and doesn't come back, or simply doesn't go to university because the distance to it makes it too difficult. So we can warm up those higher education cold spots as well. And in 20 years' time, I can see there being Enmites or something like Enmite in 5 or 6 different areas of the country. Maybe it'll be a single institution with lots of locations, or lots of different lots of different institutions all trying some innovative new model. I don't particularly mind. I mean, I'm quite interested in creating a movement, around what we're doing. So it'd be very exciting if we could do that. So I think in 20 years, we certainly hope to see something along those lines.
I mean, with all you're doing, do you get any time, to yourself? And if you do, how do you like to spend it?
Oh, I don't get that much time, and I keep being nagged by my wife about that. So I probably should take more time than I do. I live in a very beautiful part of the country. I mean, Herefordshire is a stupendously beautiful part of England. So I must say I enjoy weekends very much. I try not to work on, very much at weekends. I often do, but I try not to. And I wake up to bird song. I like walking in the countryside. I have a small dog, and my wife and I like walking. So, weekends we do quite a lot of that. And if the football season's on, then on a Saturday afternoon, I'll generally go to a football match. And that's one of those, everybody has something they do that sort of freezes out all the pressures of the day job, don't they? There's usually something somebody does that freezes everything else out. And then for 2 or 3 hours, you have that blissful disconnection from all the normal pressures of life. For me, it's standing on a football terrace watching a football match. So I do that. And that's how I stay sane. If you judge that I am sane, which you may not.
Well, I do. So would that be Hereford United?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's not without its ups and downs.
Well, look, James Newby, thank you very much indeed for this afternoon's podcast, and thank you very much for everything you're doing in your initiative. It's deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for having me.